Hi there, I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark, and we're so glad that you're joining us today for The Honest Talk.
We're excited to be bringing you conversations with some of North America's most inspiring women, and we are thrilled to be partnering with RBC as we do so.
This podcast is about leaving behind the talking points and diving into the real, authentic, and unique personal stories of our guests. Stories which we hope might influence or inspire your own journeys.
So let's get right to it. Catherine, today we're having a conversation with a woman who had a trailblazing career in politics, and that's Kathleen Wynne, who served as a school trustee and a member of Provincial Parliament and Cabinet before she was elected Ontario's first and only female premier.
I am actually really looking forward to this conversation, Jen, because I had the chance to interview Kathleen Wynne recently. We were at an event. She was on stage with former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. And what struck me was not just how smart she is, but how down to earth and how well she and Kenney, who are two very different former premiers, two very different political animals, got along. It was really impressive. And I also felt that in this age where politicians just seem to throw shade at each other, it was super refreshing.
Yeah, that is refreshing, and you don't see it enough. So why don't we get to that interview? Kathleen Wynne, we're so happy to have you here. Welcome to The Honest Talk.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So there's obviously a lot going on in the world right now. How are you feeling?
How am I feeling? I'm feeling apprehensive, I would say. I feel like we're living in a precarious moment as Canadians, particularly, living next to this erratic president-elect. So I think that every day you sort of wake up and wonder what's going to happen. I think there's a song about that. But I feel like I don't understand the path that we're on. And, you know, I was born in 1953, and I have, over my life, I have felt like we're making progress. We're moving in a direction where the world is going to be safer, cleaner, more inclusive, more understanding of people with differences and challenges. And now it feels like for the last few years, we've been going backwards on that trajectory. So I feel unsettled, I have to say.
If we follow up on that and we kind of focus specifically on women, I think there is a sense, certainly, you know, Jen and I both have daughters and sons. We also have mothers who, in their own way, different career paths, and chose to be working mothers. And they always just taught us that what they were doing was making a better path for us. And
Right.
So when we have conversations with our moms right now and with other women, there's this sense of regression. You know, have we done all of this to still be back here now? But you sound like you're feeling the same way, but then what do we do about that?
Right. So I teach a course at U of T in public policy, one in September and one in January. And last year I did a plenary session with a few of the classes, and I talked about this new permission for misogyny. And so particular to where we are as women, it feels like there is permission from, you know, some of the most powerful men, particularly in the world, to basically turn the clock back on the progress that we've made. Not in terms of the sort of regulation and laws around women's rights, although the Roe versus Wade, you know, the fact that women in America have much more difficulty now finding a way to have an abortion, to control their own bodies. That is a huge legal setback. But I think beyond that, it is a permission to assert power over women in the public square, in terms of language, in terms of the sort of disdain that traditionally establishment has felt for women. So yeah, I feel like we're that's one of the metrics on which we're moving backwards. I mean, I think there are others. I think that in terms of work around racism and homophobia and transphobia, I think we're taking a step backwards. I'm finding myself being asked to come and delegate to Catholic school boards in Ontario that are moving back on flying the pride flag. It's 2025. These boards have been flying the pride flag and have been, teaching in an environment where equity policies were accepted. I know because I was the Minister of Education, and now they're feeling empowered to move away from that. So yes, I feel like I grew up with an expectation that we were going to continue to improve women's ability, not just to compete with men, but to be who they are, to be their whole selves in the world, and for that to be valued. And I feel like I can't count on that right now. And I have 3 granddaughters, and I have 3 grandsons who I want to live in a world where that's the norm. And I'm worried that that's not where we're going.
Well, what's your perspective on the why? Why in 2024, 2025 did we take such drastic steps backwards?
Well, I want to answer that. And you also asked me, what do we do about that? So I'll come back to that as well. The why, I think that there are a whole lot of factors in terms of why people are feeling displaced. And I say that meaning that men who grew up expecting that they were going to have a particular position in the world, or they were told that they were going to have the privileges that their fathers and grandfathers had. And then they somehow, because the workforce is changing, because we're living in an era of climate change where there's a whole economic shift that's happening. I think there are factors in terms of traditional roles that I may have grown up with, your generation wouldn't have grown up with, that I grew up with. And people feel angry that those rules have changed. I think that there is an element of men my age and maybe the next generation feeling like they don't know what the rules are supposed to be. And there's an anger associated with that. But I also think that, I mentioned climate change. I think that when we watch Los Angeles burning, or BC burning, or flooding in Northern Ontario, I think that all of that creates an uncertainty about what the future holds. And that makes people anxious. And sometimes that makes them angry, because that's not what they expected when they were growing up. They thought that we thought we were going to have a sort of infinite ability to improve and have prosperity without doing anything, without taking any responsibility for our actions. So I think that all is at play right now. I also think that the general economic uncertainty that is caused by all of that makes people anxious and makes them retrench and look for some sort of simple solutions. And so when you have somebody like Donald Trump, or even in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, handing out simple solutions to complex problems, people grab onto that and run with it. And sometimes those are very angry, dangerous movements, and I think, we look at the convoy in Canada, the notion around anti-vaxxers and the lack of respect for science, that sort of that reaction against information and evidence, I think, is part of this disenchantment that we're dealing with. What do we do about all of this? I think we do this. I think we find ways to talk to each other. I teach a couple of courses. I feel like I want to work with young people. I want to give them a sense of what it's like to be in politics, what the choices are, why it's important to be involved. And whenever a group of high school kids ask me to come and speak, I go, because I think it's very important that those of us who have been in decision-making roles or who have platforms, that we use those to try to provide some context for what kids are seeing on social media right now.
So if we take that then and we put you in a classroom and you're in front of a bunch of kids of, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, or in a university campus, what are you telling them about why it's important to get involved? And specifically, what are you telling the young women? Because it is an ugly time for women in politics, for anyone in politics. But we've published articles on our site quoting members of parliament who are literally leaving politics because of the level of aggression and fear for their physical safety and that of their families. So what are you telling people about, yes, this is still a big profession to choose. It's important to be there.
Well, yeah. And, when I was in office for 22 years as a school trustee and then MPP. And, throughout that time, really starting from the beginning, because I am a lesbian and I was, running for the school board, and there was a whole lot of homophobia. And then as social media took hold throughout my career, it became more challenging to walk into crowds and to not be to not be accosted. And there were death threats against me. There were challenges against my kids, so I've experienced that, and it is very, very unpleasant. But what I talk about with young people is what we as a team, because you don't do politics by yourself, what we as a team were able to accomplish, the changes that we made that allowed more kids to go to post-secondary, that allowed people to earn a better living wage, we put more supports in place for violence against women, those kinds of changes that we made when I was in office. And then we talk about what it's like to actually run for office and how you cope with that by having a team around you and by having to learn to compartmentalize the negativity that comes at you. But at the same time, I always talk about having people say, you must have tough skin. Well, I don't say to people you have to have thick skin. What I say to them is you have to have porous skin. You have to let enough in that you know what's going on in the world. But you have to also protect yourself from some of that. I think the most important thing is to have people around you who you trust, to go into politics because you want to do something, as opposed to wanting to be famous or have power, because those aren't real. Those are ephemeral. And so having a mission, having an idea of what it is you want to accomplish is really, really important. And then understanding that you'll accomplish some of it and you won't accomplish all of it. And the other thing I say is that when I was their age, in the late 70s, I graduated from high school in early 70s. I believed that we were going to be in a very different place when I was 71. And so what I say to them is, I can't promise you now that we're going to get all this stuff dealt with, but if we have any hope of making progress and making the world a better place, then good people have to get involved. If good people don't get involved, then we have to throw up our hands and say we've given up. And I'm not prepared to do that, I just believe that there is so much possibility in human nature, whether it's in Ontario or whether it's Canada or whether it's in the world. I believe that it is worth getting involved and bringing people with you. And the other thing is, and I'll just end on this, but the other thing is that not everybody has the ability or the inner resources to step out and put your name on a ballot or get involved. But if you do have that, then other people will come with you. And so taking your place in your community, whether it's serving on council or heading up a committee or whatever it is, if you have the ability to do that, other people will follow you. So I try to encourage people to find that in themselves and to step forward, because not everybody has the ability to do that.
So speaking of not giving up, you became a provincial cabinet minister and then Ontario's first and only female premier. But your path to victory was not always clear. You ran a couple of times for various positions and weren't successful at certain points in your career. What motivated you to keep trying? Because a lot of people run once, they're not successful, and they move on.
It's such a great question, because it is so much a part of what I believe many political stories tell. So in 1994, I ran for school trustee in North Toronto, and my kids were quite young. And my partner Jane and I had been together for about 4 years, and there was a lot of homophobia in that campaign. There was homophobia in every campaign that I ran, but there was a lot of homophobia in that campaign. But the thing about that campaign that was wonderful for me was that I discovered how much I loved the process, So it gave me permission to not walk up to someone's door, knock on their door, and have a real conversation about education, their children's future, what was going on in the community, And that was, I absolutely loved that. I lost that election by 72 votes. And what that did for me was it showed me I would live if I lost. I was devastated the next day. I can remember just because we'd worked really hard. But it showed me what the process was like, and it showed me that you pick yourself up and you carry on. It also showed me that you had to have a plan B. You can never count on winning, and so that was a real gift, because losing at the beginning of your career, it gave me strength to be able to carry on, because I knew if I lost the next one, which I did, I ran for a nomination I ran for a Liberal nomination in 99 against Michael Bryant, lost that one too. But each time I did this, I was learning things, I remember in 99 at that nomination, Sheila Ward, who was one of my mentors, she's no longer with us, but she was this crusty, old, salty backroom politician from Regina, and she had been a school trustee for years in Toronto. Anyway, she was kind of running my campaign, that nomination campaign, and I remember when the vote came in and Michael Bryant had won, she stood beside me and she said, "Okay, sweetie pie, you got to go up on the stage and you got to make it unanimous and you got to be a happy warrior," And I was devastated because all sorts of reasons, but I went up on stage and Michael Bryant and I became friends. I hosted a fundraiser for him the next day. The party asked me to introduce him at a fundraiser the next day, and all of those things helped me tap into my strengths, and helped me learn about what it was like to be in that public realm, to not be the top of the heap, to have to kind of swallow my pride and take another step forward. And that was all so invaluable as I went forward. So I always recommend that people lose first and then win later, because it is more fun to win. But there's so much to be learned from losing. And, when you think about the hundreds of people who put their names on a ballot in every single election, most of them lose. So you've got to learn from the process, and there's got to be a reason to be in the race. So, for example, in 2012, when Dalton McGuinty stepped down, 2012, because I won the leadership in 2013, but in 2012, when he stepped down, there was a whole question for me around whether I would put my name into the leadership, because there was the odds-on favorite to win was Sandra Pupatello. People did not expect me to win, and so I fully expected that I was going to go into this process, if I did, and not come out on top. And so I made a decision with Jane that it was worth it to be in the debate, that it was worth it to have my name in the debate and to have my voice in the debate, because that would change the nature of the conversation. And I have said that to many candidates over the years, are you going to regret it if your voice is not part of the discussion? And if you are going to regret it, then go for it, because that means you've got something to offer and you're going to change the chemistry of the conversation. So I think that is as much a part of the process as winning, if not more.
I ask about competitiveness because listening to you, it sounds to me like you might have a little bit of a competitive streak in you and a self-belief.
A lot. Yeah.
I want to ask because you know what, a lot of women, if they are competitive or if they do really believe in themselves, they're shot down. They're told it's not a good characteristic still, even in this day and age for women. Did you encounter that?
Uh, I have
Or did you
been,
just ignore it?
well, you know what? I'm just going to say there were times in my life early on when it was, I really was shot down, and I mean early. I mean, elementary school, high school. I was very competitive. I was an athlete. I ran. I was on school teams. I wasn't a brilliant athlete, but I was a good enough athlete. And I went to a small enough high school that I could be on all the teams. Um, and so I was very, very competitive. And I was particularly competitive in the sense that I felt that women's sports, girls' sports, were denigrated as compared to boys' sports, because I grew up in an era where, the money for athletics went to the boys' teams and not to the girls' team. So we had these crappy little uniforms that we would wear, and the boys' football team had all new jerseys, and new equipment, for example. So I kind of grew up in this period of time where we were really having to fight for recognition, and so I took a lot of flack in my early years for being that competitive. But I was the eldest of four girls. I didn't have brothers. I kind of didn't know that I was supposed to defer to boys because that's not how my dad expected us to function. And so I went into the world kind of guns a-blazing and set myself up. But for whatever reason, I was able to come back and push back. I think that it did have a lot to do with my family, obviously, as these things do. So, for example, my first political action was like in grade 9. Girls weren't allowed to wear pants to school. It was 1966, and a group of us decided we were going to fight this rule, and so we would wear pants to school. We'd be sent home, and our moms would write a note and say we were allowed to wear pants to school. So I was backed up by my mother, who was kind of a feisty iconoclast herself, and so that helped me to learn that, yeah, you're going to get flack, you're going to get pushback, but then you just go back again. You don't give up. You keep pushing. So I do say to young women, if you can put yourself in situations where there's a little bit of conflict, that's not a bad thing. I remember when I was premier and we did a study on women in sports, and Michael Coteau, who was the minister at the time, came back with this report. And one of the stats was that something like 94% of women in C-suites, who were the top of the heap in terms of business, had been involved in competitive sport in one way or another. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has to be involved in sport, but I'm just saying it's interesting that many of us were in competitive environments early in our lives that gave us a sense of, well, okay, I lost that one, but I'm going to try again because I'm going to, So that, I think I was born with the competitive streak. I grew up in a competitive family, and then I had that impulse reinforced, or the strength of that. Of course, being competitive can get you into trouble, and it can, you can make enemies if you're too competitive and if you don't know how to manage it. And the other thing was that I was never conflict averse. Like, I was always, in fact, I would go into situations and I would create conflict. And so one of the best things I ever did in my life was train as a mediator. So from 1990 to 2000, I was working as a community mediator, and I was kind of honing those skills of, it was like taming my competitiveness and my fight, and trying to channel it into a constructive impulse instead of anger. So that was something that I recognized about myself, and that training really helped me when I got into politics, because I still had that competitive impulse, but I'd been through the experience of losing, And I had a different set of skills that allowed me not to just create conflict, but to try to get through it to the other side where we could come up with solutions.
I find it really interesting that you said, you had a few enemies. I believe any man or woman that has conviction and rises to the top in their profession is going to have a few enemies. And certainly, trying to people please is a syndrome that many women speak of. So I really like that insight. Kathleen, you're Ontario's first openly gay premier, and your partner Jane has been one of your closest political advisors. Can you tell us about Jane and what she's meant to you, personally and professionally?
I always say there's no Kathleen Wynne, the politician, without Jane Roundthwaite. It just wouldn't have happened. Jane and I met at Queen's in 1972. And we always joke, she hired me to be a proctor on a floor in a women's residence. She was on a committee. And so the first time we met, she was interviewing me, which is sort of interesting. And we were close friends. My husband, Phil, and I, and Jane and her first partner, Gail, we were friends through, early years when I was having kids. And then our relationship really changed in the early 90s. And Jane always believed that I was capable of doing what I wanted to do, and she's a very organized person. She was in the corporate world. She worked for Crown Life for years and was a VP there, and then became a executive management consultant in the second half of her career. So she's really, really good at looking at a big problem and chunking it down into small bits. And so, when we did that first campaign in 1994 for school trustee, we didn't have a campaign manager. I wasn't the member of a party. There was nobody who was going to come and work for us. And so we just decided we would put a map on the wall, and I'd try to canvass all the streets. So we, had a green marker and marked off the streets. And she kept my lists. She was sort of the lead fundraiser. There are two kinds of political spouses, I think. There's the kind who creates the home and is there as the refuge and really isn't involved in political life and is there when you come home and is able to catch you out of that political milieu. But then there's the other political spouse who is involved and is by your side every day consistently. And Jane is that kind of political spouse. And the reason is, I remember that same Sheila Ward said to me, Janie, you need to be at home for Kath when she comes and just, not be part of the political turmoil. And I said, yeah, but Sheila, I'm going to have to come home and tell her absolutely everything that happened. And I don't have the strength to do that. So it was clear that we were going to be a team, and we were. She was terrific throughout the campaigns, and always respectful of the boundaries of the campaign team, because that's a challenge. If the partner or spouse of the politician doesn't respect that the staff and the campaign managers are really, they're the team, they're the political team, then there can be conflict that's not healthy. But Jane was always able to balance her relationship with me and her relationship with the team. And I was always very grateful for that because I didn't have to manage that. I didn't have to run interference between my campaign manager and Jane or between Jane and my campaign manager. That just didn't happen. And my son was involved as well. And so Jane and Chris were kind of my home support. But they were very involved in the politics. I guess the only other thing I will say is that because we were a lesbian couple, there were times when the team really didn't want Jane in the picture, right? And by that, I mean the public picture, the coming off the bus or whatever. And those were hard moments. And I went on a couple of trade missions, and we were advised that Jane shouldn't come because the countries that we were going to were not we're not friendly to LGBTQ plus people. So those were some of the realities of being in a lesbian marriage. We did get married in 2005 when the laws changed, because we felt that it was important to make that statement. So she's been absolutely 100% part of my political life. And there were obviously challenging moments just because of the particular nature of our relationship.
I think that a life in politics is challenging. Even from the high points, there are always challenging moments, but you have really lived a very full political life and a full life of service. And it has been such a pleasure to be able to hear about that from you directly today. And you really are a truly authentic leader. I've found that in our discussions outside of, this podcast as well. You say what you think, and you do so in a way that is just truly authentic. And I appreciate the fact that Jen and I have had a chance to talk to you today and to learn more about you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being asked these questions. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about what it's been like. And, I hope that people listening to the podcast, if they have more questions, that they ask the women politicians in their lives, and they get a sense of what it's like, because it is so rewarding to be involved in public life, but you need to have a support system around you. So thank you for asking.
Well, that's a wrap. And to our listeners across Canada and around the world, we thank you for joining us.
You can hear The Honest Talk on iTunes, Spotify, and Simplecast, brought to you by RBC. You can also get more information on stories that matter to you at our website, thehonesttalk.ca, and sign up for our weekly newsletter where you'll get fabulous stories delivered right to your inbox.
But for now, thank you for being a part of today's podcast. Stay tuned for more great conversations and stay well.